Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And joining me is my co-host, Stecken Kerr. If you're a first-timer with us, Stecken is a sports writer, sports radio personality, lifetime H-Town sports junkie. And Stecken, plenty of Astros coming up, but let's start with the football player on my t-shirt. I got this personally made during the pandemic. It's Brian Piccolo, for those not watching on YouTube. Any reason why I would be having Brian Piccolo on my t-shirt?
Brian Piccolo? You mean the Brian Piccolo? Wow, how about that? Yeah, I certainly do know why, Robert. As you know, I mean, we hate to start the show with sad news, but of course, with the passing of James Caan, it's definitely, for those that don't know, he, of course, was the one in the movie, Brian's song.
Yeah, and it just had to show some love and respect for Piccolo and Brian's song because, you know, really because of James Caan, Brian Piccolo became a hero of mine. The way he portrayed the Chicago Bears running back in the 1971 TV movie. And Stecken, because of James Caan's unforgettable performance, not only did I fall in love with Piccolo and in turn fell in love with his best friend and Bears legend Gale Sayers, but it's also why I fell in love with James Caan. Just that whole film. And for those who don't know, this was a movie that was so well watched. 48% of everybody watching television, 48% of them were watching Brian's song when it aired. And don't forget that, and by the way, that is the most watched TV movie in history. And of course, 1 year later, James Caan, he's getting killed in a toll booth in The Godfather and what's probably the most memorable scene in one of the greatest movies ever. Within a year, James Caan had played one of the great heroes and one of the great villains. And Stecken, Tony Danza said the first time he ever saw his father cry was during Brian's song. I've heard so many guys say the same story about their dad, or even say it was the first time they remember crying watching a movie.
You know, as a former boss of mine used to say, Robert, if something like that doesn't move you, you're not alive. I mean, how can you not cry during Brian's song? And talk about opposites. Yeah, he knew how to play the good guys and he knew how to play the bad guys about as well as anyone. But yeah, very sorry to hear about that. And Brian's song, the most watched movie on television. I mean, I know that, you know, the landscape was so much different back then, but that's still an incredible figure, right? An incredible percentage, Robert.
Yeah. And the other thing that, you know, when you think of him, obviously there's those two movies, but he was relevant 30 years later in Elf. You know, he's right in Elf.
That's right.
At one point, he's in Misery and directed by Rob Reiner. We had Rob Reiner's son on the podcast a few years ago, Jake. And just over the years, so many different roles. But he just was one of those guys, Stecken, that when he was on the screen, you were fixated. His voice, his look, the whole thing. And he's just an incredible actor. But Brian's song, so important to me. And not only did I get this Brian Piccolo t-shirt made during the pandemic a couple of years ago, but I also got one of Gale Sayers. That's how much I love the movie. I love those two guys, and I love that film.
Well, and to be honest, I know how great a movie The Godfather was, but it really wasn't my kind of movie. It was something, you know, Brian's song was definitely it for me as far as James Caan was concerned.
You know, Stecken, the Astros player who might be closest to James Caan is both a hero to some and a villain to others, Alex Bregman. And he's finally hitting baseballs where there aren't fielders for the first time this year. And Stecken, between Jake Meyers and Bregman, this lineup is finally not riddled with holes like Sonny Corleone was at the toll booth.
Yeah, no doubt. Great comparison, Robert. That's quite an analogy. I love it. And, you know, at the first of the season, the first couple of months, actually, and we were kind of looking at Alex Bregman as the villain, you know, the guy that maybe we didn't want anything to do with because he wasn't hitting at all. It's nice to see him finally putting it together. Yuli's putting it together. You know, Jake Meyers coming back and pretty much, you know, basically picking up where he left off offensively last year. So, yeah, the Astros offense, I mean, it was a bit of a concern, certainly because they've been so up and down for so long, you know, and they're still running into some ruts here and there. But honestly, we're starting to see the Astros offense that I think we knew was there all along. But, you know, you get guys like Bregman and Gurriel hitting, the way we know they can, then that makes a huge difference with, everybody else coming through.
Steven, do I need to give you a few minutes to maybe get down on a knee and thank the baseball gods for giving us Yordan Alvarez? I mean, what a time to be an Astros fan right now with the way Yordan Alvarez is playing baseball.
Well, I take some time every day to thank the Lord for Yordan Alvarez. Let me tell you, there's not a day goes by that I'm not thankful that he's an Astro, and that I'm not thankful that they locked him up for a few years. We're going to see Yordan for a while, and thank goodness. And, now I think, Robert, it's safe for us to start talking about, I know we're at the midway point of the season, but I think the Houston fans, MVP. The Houston fans had it right the other day when they started chanting. I think you got to start talking about that conversation with Yordan being the clear MVP candidate at this point.
Are people getting sick of the MVP chants like they're getting sick of for me, I'm burnt out on it like I'm burnt out on the wave at this point. We do it with everybody, it seems like. There's a good week from, we'll see a good week from Josh Christopher at some point with the Rockets, and all of a sudden there'll be MVP chants. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there's a time and a place to do it. Now, with someone like Yordan, I don't think you can overplay that at all. I think he certainly should be considered. And, Robert, I have mixed emotions about whether I want him to be in the home run derby, because I'm just afraid, that you spend yourself in the home run derby, and then the second half of the season, you start falling off. I don't know if Yordan would do that, but, I'd just like him to kind of keep things going as he has been after the All-Star break, and really put himself in that position where there will be no question he'd be the MVP.
He had that play the other night where he guns the guy down from left field at the plate, and then he hit the home run the other game to walk things off. He hits another home run following the play at the plate, and as I joked, and it's not much of a joke really, I'm like, is Yordan starting? Is he going to be the starting pitcher tomorrow night? Is he going to be playing center for the Rockets during the summer league games? Is there anything he can't do?
Is he in the NHL draft? We're recording this on Thursday. The NHL draft is this evening. Robert, do you think he's going to be one of the top picks in the NHL draft? But yeah, and look, we talk so much about Yordan's hitting, but let's not underestimate his arm's been doing pretty well too. So this guy is really putting it together, I think, in all facets of the game, not just from an offensive standpoint, which is what we've been so lauding him with praise about the past few years.
It doesn't seem that long ago we were talking about, can Yordan play in the field anywhere? Is he's just what are we going to do there?
Well, I think a lot of that really was the question with his knees. I'm not sure it was so much ability. Yeah, he still had the ability, had to try to get that ability because he didn't have a lot of experience there, but the knees was the big question. Well, right now, those knees are not a question. Even his base running is well too.
It's funny, the Astros, they clean house against the New York teams pretty much, except for those two bad innings at the end of the couple of Yankees games. Then they get to the Royals and they're like, yeah, we're getting kind of bored. Let's give them a couple of run head start every night. And then they start coming back from those games, except for the one that they couldn't quite catch the Royals at. But, for those wondering, by the way, why I've actually got a KC hat. You'll see K and C on the hat. And you're wondering, because of the Royals, he loves the Royals. No, I'm paying respect to the fight the Royals just gave us, yes, but it's actually a recently purchased, you're going to love this, Steven, a recently purchased Kansas City Monarchs hat. So,
hey,
actually paying respects to Ernie Banks, Satchel Paige, Jackie Robinson, Cool Papa Bell, all former Monarchs, and of course, Buck O'Neil, who the former Monarch will be inducted into Cooperstown, don't forget, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's great to see. And of course, the Negro League's getting more recognition, their records now being classified as Major League Baseball. So that's very fitting, Robert. That's very fitting. And getting back to the series with the Royals, I think I saw somewhere that from this point forward for the rest of the season, the Astros have the easiest schedule of almost anyone in the major leagues. Well, I don't know, if that's a good thing or a bad thing, if they're going to start. Look, they took 3 out of 4 from the Royals, but it almost seemed like it was a split because of the way they had to do it. So hopefully they'll get a little more consistent against some of the teams like the Royals for the rest of the season. And they did rough up, our old friend Zach Greinke, Robert. Don't forget that.
Yeah, the focus not quite there at times during the Royal Series, and hopefully they'll get it back. I mean, they went through that tough stretch where every night felt like a playoff game, and maybe that's part of it. And it's not one guy. It seems like a lot of guys. It's just especially in the field, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, Stephen. But I heard a lot of whining from Astros fans the other day when Odorizzi gets roughed up on July 4th and his first start off the injured list. Nobody wanted to mess with the rotation. But Stephen, it's worth remembering and worth reminding people that Justin Verlander, number one, Justin Verlander was gassed 2 years ago in the playoffs before he turned 39 years old, which he is right now, and missed 2 full seasons with elbow surgery. Number two, Urquidy's never had more than 20 starts in a Major League Baseball season. And number three, Christian Javier has never pitched more than 100 innings in a major or 101 innings in a major league season. So you've got reason to have a 6-man rotation. And this is not about winning every single game in the regular season. This is about what do you do in the postseason. We've been there. We've done it. We got to figure out how to win in October. And that's why you want Odorizzi in that rotation. I don't think it's going to kill him to have him pitch 1 out of every 6 games.
Well, what you would like to see, Robert, is that, Jake it looked like he was getting things together right before the injury. He was starting to pitch much better than he had his whole time. And then the injury messed him up. So now, he's having to come back. And look, I don't think Jake Odorizzi's going to be with the Astros after this season, maybe even sooner than that, depending if he keeps getting roughed up, it's a possibility. But yeah, I think, the other thing to consider, look, they've got a 13-something game lead in their division. I don't think they're going to be relinquishing that. Hopefully they don't pull, Philadelphia Phillies, fall down from the 60s and some of these other teams that have blown big leads like that. So I think you can afford to do that. And yeah, you want your starters, especially with Verlander as well as he's doing. If he can get an extra day of rest here and there like he did this week, so be it. Because when you get to the postseason, Robert, you're going to need that energy, certainly if the Astros are going to go deep.
There's been debate over what the Astros should look for at the trade deadline, Stephen. You got catcher, center field, relief pitching. We've heard all of these positions where they might be able to upgrade. Which position would you like to upgrade most at the trade deadline, if any?
Well, honestly, Robert, I just think that if the Astros could pick up another utility infielder or, a utility player, I guess, that can play around the field, who has a little pop in their bat. I think that's really what the Astros have lacked. I think I saw, I don't know if you posted on Twitter or Facebook, maybe both, about Mauricio Dubon and just his lack of hitting. I mean, that seems to be what the Astros have gone through the last couple of years with their infield depth, especially. I mean, the outfield depth, you could always recall Jose Siri if you need to, and you've got some guys waiting in the wings, and but the depth on the infield, especially if Aledmus Diaz goes down, that's what you don't have, Robert. I think that's the biggest hole they need to fill right now.
I was about to say, you said somebody with pop in their bat. I think they picked up with somebody like that. If you've been watching Aledmus Diaz, where has this been all year? He's got some pop all of a sudden.
That's true. But I mean, beyond him, and he's not proven to be the most durable player. So you go beyond him. And if you have another injury, like, Pena, of course, has been out here and there. So that to me is the biggest hole the Astros have had, for the last couple of years, aside from the different others that they've had to try to fill with the bullpen, which is doing quite well right now for the most part, and some other positions.
Yeah, Dubon, a big deal is made about the fact that he doesn't strike out that often. And, he's starting to strike out a little bit now as we're watching the last few games here. But it doesn't matter if you don't strike out a lot if you're not getting hits. I mean, that's still the object. And it's somehow magically, I don't know how he does it, Stephen. This guy gets the bat on the ball quite a bit. And somehow it's hard to be that bad a hitter as much as he gets the bat on the ball.
Yeah, and they talk about barreling the ball. If you barrel the ball enough, eventually the hits are going to fall. Well, with him, it hasn't proven to be that way. And the other thing about striking out is, you can't move runners over when you strike out. At least if you make contact with the ball, if it's a ground ball in the right spot, If it's a bunt, something like that can move runners over, a sac fly, then at least you're helping your team somewhat. So the biggest problem with Mauricio Dubon is he's really hasn't been much of an upgrade over anyone else that they've put in that spot the last 2 or 3 years.
All right, let's get to the big question because we're almost at the All-Star break. Steven, besides Yordan Alvarez, which, we're talking about a guy that might be the MVP right now, besides him, which Astros should be on the All-Star team?
Well, I think you're going to see Altuve there. I mean, I know and I think in a pretty close race to be there as well. Beyond that, I mean, as much as I would love to see it happen, I don't know that Jeremy Pena is going to be there. As nice as that would be, I certainly, as I go up and down the roster, I don't think certainly don't think you can put Bregman on there. So, Yordan and Altuve, I say, are going to be your two guys. On my wish list, it would be Jeremy Pena, but I don't see that happening.
Pitching wise, Justin Verlander. Oh my God, he's got a 2 ERA, 11-3. He's got to be. He should be the starter, shouldn't he? Like, this is an incredible story.
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I mean, I know that some other pitchers are having good years, but if you don't start Justin Verlander in the in the American League, for the All-Star game, I don't know what you're looking at. I mean, what more does this guy have to do? In fact, if he keeps this up the rest of the season, if he doesn't get a Cy Young award, you might as well just abolish the award. Just forget it, because it is. I know, Justin Verlander is an elite pitcher and has been for a long time. And I know we've talked about that on the podcast. But to do what he's doing, Robert, I still say it's an incredible story.
Pitching wise, besides Verlander, I don't know what they do with middle relief guys, but man, Rafael Montero is just, it's like he's in a rocking chair. What he does is amazing. We take him for granted, I think.
Well, and it's good to see that, because last year he really wasn't much of a factor. I mean, he was injured part of the time. He did have some good innings when he was healthy, but I don't know that maybe you did, Robert. I don't know that I expected as much from him this year as we're getting, because this is crazy. He's just putting up some ridiculous numbers, and he's one of the reasons that the bullpen is so much better than it was last year.
The other bullpen ace that the Astros have had that, you start taking for granted a little bit has been Ryan Stanek. He's the only other one that I can really think has got an honest shot at this. I don't think Framber and Luis Garcia's numbers are quite good enough to get on the All-Star team. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about Framber. I don't know that he will. Luis Garcia has been kind of shaky lately. So, yeah, as far as the starting pitchers, I think Verlander's the only one you're going to see there. But, you go in the bullpen. I mean, they might pick someone like Ryan Presley, but Ryan Stanek, Rafael Montero, as good of a year as he's having, I'm not sure that they're going to pluck him for the All-Star game. But somebody like Ryan Stanek, has a bit of a known reputation, could possibly be a fit for the American League relief pitching.
Steven, according to the Fielding Bible website, the Astros are second in the majors in runs saved, behind just the Yankees. They're 12th in fielding percentage, 10th in fewest errors. By the standard fielding, they're still very good. But Steven, I don't know, is it just me, or have you noticed they aren't quite making the borderline plays this year that we're used to? Those ones that, that was pretty spectacular, or, it's not an error, but didn't the Astros used to make that play?
Well, maybe that's where you kind of wish Carlos Correa was still there, because he certainly made a lot of those plays. Bregman's, he's been capable of making them, but I can't think of one, at least recently this year, Robert, that he's made that made you turn around and go, wow, that's great. So, yeah, they're still up there. No question about it. I just don't think they've dazzled us the way the outfielders, you mentioned Yordan and the play some of the plays he's made from left field. Kyle Tucker's done well in right field. So the outfielders, I think, are certainly doing well as far as assists go. But the infield, I don't know. It's just there. I guess that's the best way I can say it. It's just there.
Yeah, Yuli was a Gold Glover last year. Big drop off for him at first base. Yeah. Bregman, I'm surprised at this point in his career that there's still some just easy throws that he just doesn't focus on or whatever. He occasionally makes that exciting barehanded play, but sometimes he makes the barehanded play and the throw's not good enough. It's really the throws that beat him more than anything. There's not a lot of bobbles at third base. That's what gets him. I want to get, before we finish off with the Astros, to your This Week in Astros History, but just want to say something real quickly, that we're recording this prior to the opening of the Rockets Summer League. So needless to say, we're not going to be talking about the Summer League because it hasn't happened on our watch yet. I'm looking forward to all these games, Stephen, for sure. And we'll be talking Summer League in the next week or two. I also want to remind everybody to go to our YouTube page. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or Google, wherever you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe to the YouTube page. Check out the newest playlist I made. I created a playlist. Stephen, you're going to like this one. There's a playlist with as many of the classic Houston sports commercials and promos that I could find on YouTube. Commercials with like Bum Phillips, JJ Watt, Akeem, Ken Stabler, even Phil Garner back in the day, which is kind of fun. And I also threw in some 1980s Astros, Rockets, and Gamblers promos, Stephen.
Man, I saw that the other day, Robert, and the last couple of days have been pretty tied up with work. But when I get some free time, I am definitely going to check out that playlist because that is something that'll be right up my alley. So I appreciate you putting that up there.
All right. We do a lot of history up on YouTube, and one of our favorite history segments that we've had ongoing here with Houston Sports Talk is This Week in Astros History. Stephen, what do you got for us this week? There might be some all-star stuff because we're coming right up on it this particular week.
Well, not quite, but probably next week, I'm sure we'll have something in the near future. But what I have for you, I have a couple of things, Robert, and one of them is about the killer bees. No, not those killer bees, not Bagwell, Biggio, Bell, Berkman, those guys. It's a different set of killer bees, and they made an appearance on July the 2nd of 2009. The Astros were in San Diego. They were playing the Padres, and they beat them 7-2. But in the top of the ninth, a swarm of bees descend upon left field. They end up in the ball girl's jacket. Yep, that's exactly what you heard. A bee expert had to be brought in to take care of the situation, but the game is delayed 52 minutes in the top of the ninth because of those killer bees. So, yeah, that is quite a day in Astros history and occurred on the 2nd of July of 2009.
This was a Padres game, so the uniforms for the Padres, typically yellow and brown, they matched. The bees maybe thought they were seeing big, huge bees on the field or something. Maybe that confused them.
That must have been it. And but yeah, I must admit that had slipped my mind. I saw that, Robert, and I'd totally forgotten. That was 13 years ago on July 2nd.
What else do you got in the queue this week?
Well, I had a quick one on Nolan Ryan. It was actually on the 4th of July of 1980 that Nolan Ryan recorded his 3,000th strikeout against the Reds' Cesar Geronimo. The only problem is it wasn't one of Ryan's greatest performances. He only pitched 4 innings and the Astros lost 8-1, but Ryan still racked up quite a thing there with his 3,000th strikeout against Cesar Geronimo when they played the Reds that day in 1980.
Hey, speaking of milestones, you talk about the Nolan Ryan milestone. How about Dusty moving into 8th place with his, I forget the exact total, the exact number of wins, but he moved into 8th place in all-time wins as a manager on Thursday. And Steven, my favorite thing about this is he passes Walter Alston. Walter Alston played coached or managed, I should say, from 1954 to 1976 for the Dodgers, 23 straight years for the Dodgers. His last year in 1976 was Dusty Baker's first year as a player for the Dodgers. So Dusty actually played for Walter Alston in his last year as a manager. How about that for a full circle baseball moment?
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, and then Walter Alston, I remember that, when he stepped down, of course, the guy who took his place, pretty darn good manager in his own right, Tommy Lasorda. But congratulations to Dusty. I mean, he just keeps moving up the ladder, with these milestones that he's had this season, and he keeps going. And say what you will, I know you're sometimes critical of his lineups, Robert, and some of the late postseason sags that he's had over the years. But Dusty Baker, top 8 wins in managers, not just anybody can do that.
Yeah, the thing with the Astros, which kind of confounds me at times, and I see people. I was arguing with this one person in particular on Twitter. They get upset with Dusty and the Astros. They think they overrate Martin Maldonado, and I understand that the numbers and a lot of the numbers they may not like, but Dusty Baker has been around in baseball for 50 years. When he thinks a guy is converting wins for you, then maybe you need to listen to him. James Click and Dusty Baker, all they do is go to the playoffs as a manager and as a general manager. And since Martin Maldonado has been the catcher for the Astros, well, specifically, let's just go to the last 2 years where he's been the main guy, or the last 3 years, I guess now. He took the Astros to the ALCS Game 7 his first year with the pandemic and the scandal and all of that. And he was one of the primary leaders. We always give Correa the credit or Altuve, but the catcher in a lot of ways is that leader out on the field. And he got that very young pitching staff with no Justin Verlander and a bunch of kids, Paredes and Garcia and Fromber and all those guys, the baby pitching Astros. He got him to the 7th game of the ALCS. The next year, he takes the Astros to the World Series with no Verlander, and Lance McCullers going down in the middle of the playoffs. It was Martin Maldonado, coaching and doing all he does with his magic to get Luis Garcia to have big performances on big stages during that playoff run, and to get the most out of Fromber and the bullpen guys. And look what they're doing this year. I mean, the Astros, again, one of the best teams in baseball, and they're doing it with not what we thought was this incredible lineup specifically lineup of starters. And look at what these starters are doing, and look at what it's the best pitching staff in baseball, arguably. And we got to give Martin Maldonado just a little bit of credit for that, just a little bit.
Absolutely, Robert. And look, I know the numbers that these guys are looking at are the offensive numbers. And let's be honest, Martin Maldonado, okay, he had a couple home runs the other day, but he's not a great hitting catcher. But I don't think, there are just certain intangibles that some players possess that to me are just as valuable as the ones you see on the stat sheet. And you just went over every single one of them. I mean, there's not much else I can say. Martin Maldonado, a catcher, is such a valuable part of the team, especially when you have a young pitching staff. I don't think you can discount that in the least of how valuable this guy is. An unsung hero. He really is. And you can look at his offensive numbers all day long, but there are plenty of other reasons that Martin Maldonado should be on this team and has helped this team win. And as I said, Robert, you just went through every one of them.
Yeah, we give all of these other people credit. Everybody else gets credit. Well, Jordan has stepped up since, in these last couple of years, or Tucker or whatever. The one guy that doesn't get any credit as Springer leaves and Correa leaves and Garrett Cole leaves, and one guy after another, you lose one guy after another. Big time player, all-star player, leader. Springer was a leader. Yeah. Correa was a leader. But here's Martin Maldonado, still here, still, doing what he does. It's just give him some credit for, something. I understand the numbers tell a different story according to some people, but sometimes numbers don't matter. And look, 3 or 4 at-bats just don't matter as much to managers and to GMs with catchers as does a guy that knows what he's doing with pitching staff and knows how to handle guys and the psychology of handling pitchers.
And, baseball being mostly a mental game, that's a big deal. That really is a big deal.
Final thoughts on either the Astros, anything else going on in sports, Steven?
Well, I wanted to mention, real quickly before we wrapped up that want to send congratulations to Woody Williams, who is now the new pitching coach at the University of Texas. I live here in Austin, Robert, so I follow the Longhorns pretty closely. Of course, many of us are familiar with Woody Williams, the former major leaguer, and Houston. He was, of course, the pitching coach for San Jac up until just now, but now he is on the UT pitching staff. So big congratulations to Woody for getting that job.
And also one of the worst contracts maybe in Astros history.
Probably. That is true. He didn't exactly pan out. Let's see, he played with the Cardinals for quite a few years and did have a short stint with the Astros. Didn't quite work out, but glad to see he's doing well in the coaching ranks at least.
And he was a former Cougar, right? Wasn't he a Houston Cougar?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of Houston ties for Woody Williams. And, you know, he was before he got that last stint with the Astros, he actually was a good pitcher, much better than he was before that, obviously.
Right. So, you know, UT, of course, made some shakeups, even though they went to the College World Series, and made some shakeups in the coaching staff. So that's where Woody is now.
Not a whole lot of other news going on in Houston sports. We're still waiting to find out what's going to happen with Deshaun. Steven, I don't know how long this thing is going to just keep going and going and going, but we're still waiting to, like, what are they going to do with Deshaun as far as punishment and all that? I feel like that's going to go on forever. And it's like the NBA right now is at a total standstill as all these teams are waiting for the Kevin Durant thing to drop, and that could take, I mean, the way things are going, it looks like they're not getting anywhere with that. It could be months. So it's going to be interesting, like which teams start giving up on this whole, you know, what they might do or not do, depending on the Durant deal. And there's a lot of teams, I think, that want to be a part of it, maybe help be a middle person with some of what they're, you know, there's a lot of little things going on with this Durant deal that are very interesting. But yeah,
and I still keep hearing about, you know, the Rockets should be in the conversation for getting DeAndre Ayton. So, you know, that's something that we may need to keep our eye on. I don't know that it will happen, but it's at least been in the conversation. I mean, I've been reading some national writers who are saying this. So that's something to keep an eye on. And, you know, that, of course, can kind of trickle down with the whole Kevin Durant situation.
Yeah, they could be a middle person and potentially get Durant to Houston. I don't think they're going to do that because I just get the feeling.
I don't see that happening.
Just get the feeling with Durant that they feel like he's good enough to knock him out of a good spot in the lottery next year. Although I just don't care. I'm like, if you can get a guy that has talent as a center and as a defensive guy and can be sort of a brick behind your defense, you know, I think you get that guy if you can, if you think he's going to be a difference maker, and you put him with Jabari and, you know, Jalen Green, and all of a sudden you might actually really have something. And maybe
your rebuild is over.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that.
You can work all the way up to a play-in game potentially with that type of talent and those guys. So who knows? Always good to catch up with you, Steven. We got to do it again soon. Definitely going to have some at least one podcast next week, if not more than one with guests. And if Steven can join us for one, that'd be great as well. But we're gonna keep bringing you guys some shows. Go back into the archives if you haven't. But had a great time, Steven. And
same here, Robert.
So much fun when the Astros are playing well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Let's see if they can keep it up.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.